Hundreds of thousands take part in protests in Paris, and 27 were arrested after President Emmanuel Macron rejected a pause in his controversial pension reform plan. The French take to the streets in Paris and other major cities across the country on the 10th day of national strikes. Almost 2 weeks after the government passed its own pension reform, unions vow to continue the protests until they back down. Around 740,000 people took part in the protests, according to the Interior Ministry, and 27 arrested.
Tensions have been running high here in central Paris. Protesters have been burning trash cans and scooters, building barricades to prevent riot police from coming to this side of the avenue. Two very big groups of riot police are in each side of this avenue, and they've been using tear gas to try and disperse demonstrators. 13,000 officers were deployed across the country, more than 5,000 here in the French capital alone, but that didn't help calm things down, quite the opposite. Many here are saying this is no longer about only the reform of the pension system, but about inflation, the high cost of living, climate inaction, and a series of policies of Emmanuel Macron's administration they say they are against. This is going to be a very difficult situation for the administration of the French president to deal with. And protesters are already calling for another march here in Paris on Thursday. Annalise Borges in Paris for Euronews.
Very nice to see you. Sorry for the wind.
Charles Michel has assured Moldovan Prime Minister Maia Sandu that Moldova has the European Union's full support on its road to membership of the bloc. On an official visit, the President of the European Council said the country had become a target for Russia. The EU has mobilised over €1 billion to support Moldovan stability.
Moldova, a candidate country for EU membership, and this is a historic opportunity for your country and for your people, and absolutely convinced that it must be seized and it will be seized. Ladies and gentlemen, Russia continues to attack the free people of Ukraine, and here in Moldova, you are heavily impacted by Russia's war against Ukraine. You have increasingly become a target of Russia's malign intelligence.
Several pro-Russian protests have taken place in recent weeks. Sandu's pro-European government accuses Russia of trying to destabilize the country. Alexei Moskilov enters a Russian courtroom flanked by police to face charges of discrediting Moscow's army on social networks, a case brought after his daughter drew anti-war pictures at school. But there was to be a twist the next day when the court sentenced him to 2 years in prison. A spokesperson announced he'd fled house arrest, to the delight of the applauding audience. But he's already been stripped of custody of his daughter Maria, who's in an orphanage.
Дело показательное, и народу нужно показать, что будет с теми людьми, кто не согласен с существующими, так скажем, обстоятельствами, с нашими последними событиями годичными. И показательно в том смысле для родителей, что будет с вашими детьми, если вы не согласны, если вы протестуете.
Maria's written to her father to praise him as a hero. He insists he's against what the Kremlin insists on calling a special military operation. The case has been held up as an example of Russia's crackdown on dissent. The International Olympic Committee has opened the door to Russian athletes returning to competition, but not yet to the 2024 Olympic Games. IOC President Thomas Bach postponed a decision on Russian and Belarusian athletes participating in Paris, but recommended federations let them take part in lesser events.
One, Athletes with a Russian or a Belarusian passport must compete only as individual neutral athletes. 2. Teams of athletes with a Russian or Belarusian passport cannot be considered. 3. Athletes who actively support the war cannot compete. Support personnel who actively support the war cannot be entered.
The prospect of Russians participating in Paris has prompted protests. Polish Deputy Foreign Minister Piotr Wawryk said on Twitter that it was a day of shame. But the Russian Olympic Committee has denounced the IOC's reinsertion criteria as discriminatory.
Lisbon roads once again bustling, hours after the horror inside the Ismaili Muslim centre in Portugal. A man wielding a large knife killed 2 women and injured several other people on Tuesday. Now Portuguese authorities are investigating whether it was a possible terror act.
Queria registrar a pronta intervenção da Polícia de Segurança Pública, que permitiu a detenção do suspeito, que está neste momento no Hospital Santa Maria a receber os cuidados médicos. É, obviamente, prematuro fazer qualquer interpretação sobre as motivações deste ato criminoso, mas devemos aguardar com segurança que as autoridades procedam às necessárias investigações.
The women killed were Portuguese staff members at the centre. Police say the officers ordered the suspect to surrender and he was shot when he advanced towards them. He is now in police custody at a Lisbon hospital. Local Afghan community leaders and Portuguese authorities describe the suspect as a refugee from Afghanistan.
Я думаю, що ми перші, хто в Україні пішов по новому способу отримати гроші або компенсації від Російської Федерації.
Before the war, Shazara was a Ukrainian company of more than 15,000 employees specializing in space electronics. With almost 6 decades of history, it was an important driver of the local economy in the northern city of Chernihiv.
Свого часу це було, скажімо так, підприємство, вокруг якого організовувалось місто Чернігів. Градообразуючим підприємством було.
Yet months of Russian attacks deeply damaged its production and infrastructure.
Був один окремий день, коли по заводу били зранку і до вечора. Тобто це однозначно була спрямована атака іменно по території заводу.
Now they only have about 300 employees left. They claim their losses run to some 530 million euros. And here comes the biggest question. Where do you get this money from? But they believe they've found a formula.
Росія не погоджується виплачувати ні репарації, не погоджується виплачувати збитки. Але є підприємства, держави, концерни, які винні Росії якісь гроші або якісь інші речі. Тому завдяки, що не забороняється міжнародним правом, по договору цесії уступити ці борги. Ці нормальні європейські фірми, держави можуть оплатити нам в счет боргу, який вони винні Росії.
So basically, they want to get the money they say they're owed from Western companies previously doing business with Russia, which cannot pay back debts owed to the country due to sanctions. To do this, Shazara first has to take the case to court in Ukraine and win. Then it has to be recognised in the countries where they want to claim money: Italy, Germany, Poland and France. Experts believe this is actually possible, but there is a big obstacle in the way: state immunity.
There is a general idea that states are equal, and so the courts of one state cannot sit in judgment over another state. That usually means in cases where you sue another country, that country asserts immunity, and that is the end of the lawsuit. Now, immunity is no longer absolute.
Shazara's lawyers will argue Russia is exempt from immunity. due to a UN resolution that acknowledges immunity cannot apply when a country grossly violates international guaranteed fundamental freedoms and human rights.
They are not necessarily likely to prevail, but Ukraine has so far been very diligent in plotting out a legal strategy as well. And I wouldn't say from the get-go there is no chance at all.
Якщо воно не буде, то будемо чекати, як і всі, перемоги України, репарацій, і тоді будемо отримувати вже інше.
All cars sold from 2035 in the European Union will be zero emissions. It's decided. EU energy ministers gave their final approval on Tuesday. The regulation will ban the sale of all combustion engine vehicles, except for ones running on e-fuels, an explicit request by Germany after a spat with the European Commission and other EU countries.
Germany with Italy and Poland, because that was the point, that they had this minority blocking position, have played at the very last moment on an issue, on a file that was already agreed by the different institutions. And as a matter of principle, we don't like this approach. We think it is not fair.
Some EU countries voted against the new law, including Poland. But this wasn't enough to stop it in its tracks. In 2026, the European Commission is expected to evaluate its decarbonisation goals, which could lead it to review parts of the regulation.